Good morning, dear students. Last time we had seen cranial nerves 7, 9 and 10. So today we would see cranial nerves 8, 11 and 12. So today's learning objectives are to know the test of assessment for vestibulocochlear nerve and hypoglossal nerve, which is 11th nerve, and 12th nerve, and spinal accessory, which is the 11th cranial nerve. So as I had told last time, whenever you start with clinical examination, you have to introduce yourself to the patient. You should make the patient comfortable, ask him to sit on the chair and obtain his details. Then briefly explain him how you'll perform examination on him in a patient-friendly language. Also gain consent for the examination. And before you proceed to the clinical examination, ask history of pain, whether it is present, and if present, where is the site of pain. And then in the general examination, since we are focused on 8th nerve, 12th nerve and 11th nerve, we should look for these findings. That is, if the patient has got any speech abnormalities, that is dysarthria. Does he have any hearing issues? Does he have nystagmus, which will be evidently seen in his eyes? I mean, unintentional, involuntary movements of the eyeballs, that is known as nystagmus. Does the patient has got loss of balance, or does he give history of imbalance and gait? And also look for these following objects, especially hearing aids if the patient is having any hearing issue. Walking stick, especially present in people who have got balance issues, and if the patient has got any prescriptions. Before let us always sanitize our hands before we go for clinical examination. And what is the other equipments needed? That is the tuning fork, which we use to assess 8th cranial nerve, and writing pad to note our findings. Hand sanitization, either with soap and water or hand sanitizer. So now let us see how we will assess the vestibulocochlear nerve. Now, as we know, the 8th nerve has got two components. That is the cochlear nerve, which we use for hearing, and the vestibular component, which is involved in balance as well as equilibrium. So we had seen last time the different causes of hearing loss. So the conductive hearing loss includes genetic cause, any viral infection or diseases, even head trauma can cause conductive hearing loss. And the other causes are otitis media, that is accumulation of fluid in the middle ear, any allergies, foreign objects in the ear, ruptured eardrum or tympanic membrane, and also impacted earwax can lead to conductive hearing loss. Whereas the causes of sensory neural hearing losses could be aging, ototoxicity. We had seen some drugs like aminoglycosides, loud noise. Exposure to constant loud noise can also cause sensory neural hearing loss. Sudden exposure to loud sound due to a blast or explosion can cause sensory neural hearing loss. And sometimes tumors invading the vestibulocochlear nucleus or the nerve can also lead to sensory neural hearing loss. Now, we had seen about the conduction of sound. It is conducted in two forms, that is either air conduction or bone conduction. So this is what is air conduction. Now, what happens in air conduction? In air conduction, which are the structures being used? It is pinna, it is the ear canal, tympanic membrane, and the three ossicles. So all these components play an important role in amplification of sound as well as directing the sound. So as a result of this, the lesions in either outer ear or the middle ear will lead to issues with the sound conduction. So whenever there is lesion in the outer or middle ear, it will lead to conductive hearing. Whereas, let us see about the bone conduction. If the skull is vibrated either with the help of a tuning fork or a bone stimulator, the whole skull is set into vibration. And as we know that the cochlea is embedded within the petrous bone, the vibration of the skull will set this cochlea into vibration, and that will further get set the endolymph into vibration and will cause stimulation of the hair cells. So the bone conduction allows the vibration to be transmitted to the inner ear. So for bone conduction, which is the important structure responsible, it is the inner ear. So as it is only inner ear which is involved and there is absence of amplification, and the volume of sound which is transmitted is also reduced in bone conduction. So when you compare air conduction and bone conduction, the sound which is heard because of air conduction is much more because of the amplification or the impedance matching. Whereas in the bone conduction, the volume is less. So if there is a lesion in the inner ear, there will be problem in the sound transducing system, that is conversion of the mechanical energy into electrical energy. So that phase is affected. So this type of lesion is known as sensory neural hearing loss. So two things which are to be always kept in mind before you do the tuning fork test. So if the cochlea or the auditory nerve is destroyed, means this portion, the person will become permanently deaf, or it is also known as non-functional ear. But if this section, I mean the inner ear and the nerve is intact, but the tympanic membrane or the ossicles have been destroyed or damaged, the bone stimulation will cause conduction of sound to the cochlea. So for conduction, I mean for the person to hear the sound, the most important structure is cochlea and the auditory nerve. So when do we decide that it is a time for hearing test? If the person always has got TV or radio tuned up to a very loud sound, or if he struggles to follow conversation and asks the person to repeat themselves, if he hears muffled hearing or has got difficulty in hearing whenever there is a background sound, if he often misses the phone calls or the doorbell, if he always turns his neck or twisting, what we say as, to hear any conversation, or if he's upset when confronted about hearing problems, and sometimes it is withdrawal and isolation. So if you come across these signs and symptoms, you can suspect the person may have any hearing loss. So what are the clinical tests for hearing? Means bedside, how we would assess the person for hearing issues. So we have this list which includes finger friction test, watch test, human speech voice test, tuning fork test. In tuning forks, we have three tests, that is Rennie's test, Weber's test, and Schwabach's test. Now, what is finger friction test? Now, what we do is we rub the thumb and the finger close to the patient ear. Okay, so at this distance, almost 3 to 4 centimeters away from the pinna. So if the person can hear sound, we can assess that his hearing is normal. So this is a rough and a quick method, but it is not so sensitive. For doing all these hearing tests, we need a comparatively silent room for assessment. Coming to the watch test. Now what we use here is a tick of the watch. So we use that clicking watch and we get that watch close to the patient from a particular distance. And the point where he hears this sound is measured. If it is in normal range, okay. So normally we assess around from distance of 1 to 2 feet, he should hear the click of the watch. Next is the human speech voice test. Now, here we assess whether the person has got sensitivity to hear the conversation of around 40 to 50 decibel. So from a distance of 6 meters, the examiner would be standing behind. Or if the examiner is standing in front, the eyes are shielded so that he cannot lip read what the examiner is speaking. And the opposite ear is occluded. So the testing here is unoccluded and the opposite ear is occluded. And slowly from a distance of 6 meters, the examiner will start approaching the patient and simultaneously he is also speaking. So the distance at which he first hears a conversation at normal voice and then when he hears a whisper, both are measured. So normally a person will hear a conversational speech from a distance of 10 to 12 feet. Whereas if, from a distance of 10 to 12 inches, he should be able to hear the whisper sound. So for the human speech voice test, conversational speech is, normally is to be heard from a distance of 10 to 12 feet, whereas the whisper should be heard from a distance of 10 to 12 inches. It's an easy thing to remember. Going to next, the tuning fork test, or the standard bedside assessment for the hearing. So this is what we do. So as you see, this is the tuning fork. So it is a quick, useful and a simple screening test bedside. And as usual, the room should be reasonably quiet. If there is a lot of background score, the person may not be able to appreciate the sound which is produced because of the tuning fork. And for the tuning fork test, we use 512 Hertz tuning fork. As we know, we have different frequencies of tuning forks, out of which we choose the highest one, that is 512. We do not prefer 128 or 256 Hertz because it is usually used for assessing the vibration sensation in case of neurological examination. So whenever you have to choose a tuning fork for hearing test, be very careful that you always choose the highest one, that is 512 Hertz, not the lower frequency. Lower frequencies are used to assess vibration test, whereas 512 is used to assess hearing. Then, now look at the parts of the tuning fork. Now this tuning fork consists of U-shaped prongs. These are the two prongs which are connected here. And then we have a stem. We hold the tuning fork near the stem, and this is the foot plate or base of the tuning fork. So you have to remember this part. This is prongs, stem, foot plate or base. Then next, how do we use tuning fork? The striking of the tuning fork is you should know the correct technique of striking the tuning fork, or sometimes it is also known as charging the tuning fork. So we hold the tuning fork by stem here in between thumb and the index finger. So this is how you should hold the tuning fork. And then if you concentrate here, this is the upper 1/3 and the lower 2/3. So when you want to strike the tuning fork, you have to strike at the junction of the upper 1/3 and the lower 2/3. Look here in the diagram. Okay, so here, this is the side where you have to strike the tuning fork. And you should always strike the tuning fork on a firm surface. That is, for example, your hypothenar eminence, so that you get pure tone vibrations. Okay, so you have to hit on the, not hit, actually strike on the hypothenar eminence to generate pure tone vibrations. Now, what precautions you have to take? Now remember, avoid striking on a hard surface like table, okay, because it can damage the tuning fork. And second thing, when you strike it on a hard surface, it can cause production of multiple overtones, which is not required. What we want from the tuning fork is a pure tone. We don't want multiple overtones. So avoid striking on hard surface. And once the tuning fork is set into vibrations, do not touch the vibrating prongs. Otherwise, that will dampen the vibrations of the tuning fork. Now let us see the Rennie's test. Now Rennie's test was proposed by Adolphe Rennie in 1855. Now here it has got two steps. So first is we would assess the bone conduction first, and then we would go for assessment of air conduction. Now to assess bone conduction, we would set the tuning fork into vibration and then place the vibrating tuning fork on the mastoid process of the tested ear. Okay, so this is how you should keep the foot plate or the base of the tuning fork on the mastoid process. So first set the tuning fork into vibration and then place the base of the tuning fork over the mastoid process. Now because of this vibration, the skull is set into vibration and the person will hear the sound through bone conduction. So the next instruction is you should ask the patient to report when he no longer hears the sound through bone conduction. So a set of instructions are very, very important here. you should tell that once you start hearing the sound, concentrate on the sound, and once you stop hearing the sound, please uh, indicate that the sound is no longer heard. Now, once the sound through bone conduction has stopped, the next step is to move the tuning fork from the mastoid process in front of the ear canal. So you have to place the tuning fork adjacent to the ear canal 3 to 4 centimeters away and orient it perpendicular to the ear canal. So the prong should be like this. It should not be like this. Okay. So this is how you should place. Now here the sound wave will be conducted through air and will strike the tympanic membrane. So this is what is air conduction. So again, when the person no longer hears the sound conducted through air, he has to indicate. So this is what are the steps for Rennie's test. First is we assess bone conduction and then we assess air conduction. For bone conduction, you will place the vibrating tuning fork over the mastoid process, and when the person stops hearing the sound, you move the tuning fork in front of the ear canal 3 to 4 centimeters away, but kept perpendicular to the ear canal. And when he no longer hears the sound through air conduction, again he has to indicate. Now, so we are assessing air conduction and bone conduction in the same ear. So we are comparing air conduction and bone conduction with each other. Now, normally air conduction is better than bone conduction. So when air conduction is better than bone conduction, we say that Rennie's test is positive. So remember, so here positive means normal. Okay, so don't get confused over here. So Rennie's positive is normal, which means that air conduction is better than bone conduction. So this is again I am repeating, when no sound is heard through air conduction after removal of fork from the mastoid process, it is considered as negative test. Means you have kept the fork over here, tuning fork, and through bone conduction, he has indicated that the sound is no longer heard. And when you place the tuning fork in front of the ear canal, he cannot hear the sound through air conduction. Means here, air conduction is not more than bone conduction. It means Rennie's is negative, which is abnormal. Okay, so when bone conduction is heard, if the bone conduction through the mastoid process is heard louder than air, it is always abnormal, which is suggestive of conductive hearing loss. Now let us see the interpretation. So in normal hearing here, air conduction is more than bone conduction. Okay, so it is Rennie's positive. Now coming to conductive hearing loss, here there is a problem in the sound conducting system. So what is going to happen? Here the air conduction will be less than that of bone conduction. So it is Rennie's negative. Now coming to sensory neural hearing loss. So here the problem is in the inner ear. So there is no problem in air conduction. So what is going to happen? Here again, air conduction will be more than that of bone conduction because the sound transduction is affected. So again, air conduction is more than bone conduction, which means it is Rennie's positive. But when you compare the duration is of hearing is shorter as compared to that of normal hearing. So these are the peculiar characteristics in sensory neural hearing loss. In conductive hearing loss, Rennie's is negative, whereas in sensory neural hearing loss, it is Rennie's positive. The difference is from the normal is the duration of hearing is shorter than the normal hearing. So we can conclude that Rennie's positive means air conduction is more than bone conduction. It means either the person is having normal hearing or he has got sensory neural hearing loss. When Rennie's is negative means when bone conduction is more than that of air conduction, it means it is conductive hearing loss. Now, how do we differentiate between this normal and sensory neural hearing loss? For this, we need the Weber's test, which helps in deciding whether it is normal or sensory neural hearing loss. So Rennie's and Weber's go hand in hand. We cannot use only one test to diagnose a particular type of hearing loss. Now, when Rennie's test could be false negative, it is a very important thing we have to keep in mind. It is especially seen in case of unilateral profound sensory neural hearing loss, means this scenario. So in this case, what is happening is the right ear is non-functional or deaf ear. So in non-functional deaf ear, both air conduction as well as bone conduction is gone because the cochlea or the auditory nerve is totally damaged. So what is going to happen? So when you keep the mastoid, the tuning fork over the mastoid process of the right side, the whole skull is set into vibration. So it will set both the cochlea into vibration, but the right ear, as it is non-functional, it will not perceive the bone conduction. But because of simultaneously the left cochlea is set into vibration, what is going to happen? Via the transcranial conduction, the left cochlea is set into vibration. So the person will perceive that he is hearing sound. Actually, he should not be hearing, but he hears because of the transcranial transmission. So here the person will say that the bone conduction is present, but air conduction is absent. So we interpret it as bone conduction is more than that of air conduction. But technically, it is actually false because in the right ear, because it is non-functional, both air conduction as well as bone conduction is absent. So this is one thing you have to remember whenever there is false negative Rennie's test. So what are the limitations? First thing, it is a screening test. Second, the technique may not be uniform. You have to really practice and practice, especially keeping the tuning, the base of the tuning fork and taking care that the vibrating prongs are not dampened by your touch. Second, it is not sensitive in differentiating to what extent the hearing loss is present. And there are chances of false negative, and it needs to be complemented with Weber's test. Single-handed Rennie's test cannot diagnose conditions. Now coming to Weber's test. Now it was proposed by Ernest Heinrich Weber. It is basically the test for lateralization. Now it is combined with Rennie's test to know what is the nature of hearing. So now we know that inner ear is more sensitive to air conduction than bone conduction. Why? Because the amplification component is present in air conduction, which is absent in bone conduction. Now whenever there is a unilateral conductive hearing loss, we see that there is relative improvement in the ability to hear bone conducted sound. Why? The reason is there is absence of the masking effect. Now we know that whenever the masking is there, means some sound is already engaging few of the hair cells. And when during this period, that is of masking, some auditory nerve fibers are in phase of refractoriness, that is absolute refractory period. Means the second sound cannot elicit a response. So as a result, whenever masking is present, you may not be able to hear it properly. In case of conductive hearing loss, this masking effect of the environmental sounds are absent. So the affected ear, the sound reaching cochlea via AC is, in the affected ear, the absent masking effect of the environmental sound reaching cochlea via AC is as compared to that of the unaffected. So coming to the Weber's test, how do you do it? Now what we do is we place the tuning fork, vibrating tuning fork in the midline, either in the vertex or in the over here or over here. And then because of this vibrating tuning fork, the whole skull is set into vibration and the vibration will set the inner ear into vibration. So what instruction you give is you ask the person whether he hears the sound in the midline. Can he hear the sound in both the ears first thing? And if he's hearing, is the sound perceived equally in both ears or either of the ear hears it better? So this is one thing you have to ask the patient. Now, when both the ears are normal, what is going to happen? Equal loudness would be perceived in both ears. That is what is symmetrical hearing, which is a normal case. Now, what will happen when there is conductive hearing loss in the right ear? So, what is going to happen? Whenever there is conductive hearing loss, because of the absence of the masking effect, the bone conduction would be perceived better in the affected ear. So, what is going? So, the result would be the sound would get lateralized to the affected ear. And when there is sensory neural hearing loss, what is going to happen? This ear will perceive less sound because the inner ear is affected. And this is a normal inner ear. So the sound would be perceived in the better in the normal side. So in sensory neural hearing loss, the sound would get lateralized to the better ear. So in conductive hearing loss, the sound gets lateralized to the affected ear, whereas in sensory neural hearing loss, the sound gets lateralized to the better ear or the healthy ear. Now coming to Schwabach's test. In Schwabach's test, we measure only bone conduction. So what we do is we keep the vibrating tuning fork over the mastoid process till the point when the subject no longer hears it. And the moment he says he is no longer hearing the sound, you take that tuning fork and keep it on your mastoid process, assuming that we have normal hearing. So what we do is the bone conduction of the patient is compared with that of the examiner, presuming that the examiner has got normal hearing. So whenever there is sensory neural hearing loss, the subject will hear the tone for a shorter time than that of normal. Whereas in case of conductive hearing loss, the subject might hear longer than that of normal because of the absent masking effect. So how do we interpret this tuning fork test? So normally in Rennie's, air conduction is more than that of bone conduction. In Weber's, he hears equally on both sides, whereas in the Schwabach's test, BC is equal to that of examiner. In case of conductive neural hearing loss, once the bone conduction is over, he will no longer hear vibrations through AC. Whereas in Weber's, the sound is lateralized towards the affected ear or the diseased ear. And the reason is the absence of masking effect. Again, in Schwabach's test, BC would be more than that of the normal, that is the examiner. When you compare this, when you come to sensory neural hearing deafness, AC will be more than BC, but the duration of hearing would be less than that of the examiner. And it can persist till there is complete nerve deafness. In Weber's, the sound will get lateralized to the normal ear, whereas in Schwabach's, the bone conduction would be worse or less than that of the examiner. So you have to keep these three things in mind. Okay. Now coming to vestibular function test, it is just for your knowledge. We would not be performing it on the patient. So in the caloric test, what we do is, so this is the other name for caloric test is vestibular ocular reflex. So here, this was first described by Robert Brani in 1906, for which he had received the Nobel Prize in 1914. So what he had observed in his routine practice was whenever he was doing ear irrigation for removal of wax, the patients used to complain that whenever the temperature of the water used to alter, they used to develop vertigo or nystagmus. And what he usually observed was the eyes used to go in different directions for warm water irrigation and cold water irrigation. So because of this observation, he developed a research and he proposed a theory. So what are the indications for caloric test? First thing is to isolate whether the vertigo in the patient is because of a peripheral cause or central cause. So caloric test is good in diagnosing the peripheral causes of vertigo. As it does not require the movement of head, we have better patient compliance in case of caloric test. And this test can be used very well in patients with limited cervical mobility. And the most important thing is this reflex requires an intact brainstem. So whenever you're doing this test, we are assessing the brain function. And especially in case of comatose patient, this test is used to assess the brainstem function. So this is what is the importance of caloric test. Now, what are the contraindications? Now, as we are doing irrigation, perforated tympanic membrane, we should not do it, as well as if the patient is having fracture of the basilar skull or the petrous bone, we should avoid doing the caloric test. And if you are suspecting CSF otorrhea, otorrhea means leakage of CSF into the ear canal. So if that is also present, you should avoid doing caloric test. Now, what we do is, we place a syringe for in the ear canal for irrigation of the ear canal. So the subject's head is tilted back at 60 degrees, and then we irrigate with cold saline that is at 30 degrees. Okay, so cold is 30 degrees and hot is 44 degrees Celsius. So they both of these are used in sequential manner in each ear. So what is the principle behind it? So whenever there is a change, temperature change in the labyrinth, the specific gravity of the endolimb gets altered, which will set convection currents in the endolimb. So because of which the cupula is set into motion and the hair cells get stimulated. So when the hair cells get stimulated, it reflects as if the head is set into rotation. So what will happen when you irrigate with cold water? So when you irrigate with cold water, the right horizontal endolymph temperature will fall. So if there is fall in the temperature, that will reduce the rate of firing from that semicircular canal. So what is going to happen? The person, it will be like a situation where the head is being turning to the left side. So when the head is turning to left side, what is the reflex? The eyes turn towards the right ear with the horizontal nystagmus. Means irrigation in the right ear. So it will mimic as if the head is turning to the left side. So the eyes will turn to the right side. That is the slow component. And the compensatory fast component will be towards the left ear. Similarly, when you do irrigation with warm water, what do you see? When warm water is being irrigated, the right horizontal endolymph temperature will rise. So whenever the temperature rises, it will cause increase in the rate of firing. Means the situation will be like the head is turning to the right side. So if the head is turning to the right, where the eyes will rotate, the eyes will start turning towards the left ear with horizontal nystagmus, means towards this side. So the bold arrows means the slow phase of the nystagmus. So this will start turning to the left side, and the compensatory fast component will be towards the right ear. So we can summarize that whenever you are doing irrigation either with cold or warm water, there is an imbalance between the firing rates from the right ear as well as the left ear. So it will either induce nystagmus, vertigo or dizziness in the patient. So once the testing is done, you should ensure that the patient ear is completely dried off, and you have to examine the tympanic membrane for testing related injury. So this is what is the bold line is slow phase nystagmus and the dotted line is the fast phase nystagmus. So when you are doing irrigation with the cold water in the right ear, the fast nystagmus, the compensatory fast phase is towards the left ear. And when you check with the warm water, it is towards the right ear. So the mnemonic is developed, that is cows. That is cold is opposite and warm is same side. Now, if you see there is disconjugate deviation during irrigation, what does it indicate? It indicates that there is impaired brainstem function at or below the level of oculomotor nucleus. So how do we interpret the caloric test? So if the positive response means whenever you do irrigation and the eyeballs are set into horizontal nystagmus, that is known as positive response. So if you get a positive response to caloric test, it means the brainstem function is intact. In case of vestibular dysfunction, the reflex is diminished. Whereas absence of horizontal eye movement means there is comatose brainstem injury or brain death. Whereas in a comatose patient, if you get this intact full reflex horizontal eye nystagmus, it means that the lesion is at the level of cerebral hemisphere. So this is how we interpret the caloric test. Now coming to another test for vestibular function is Brenny's chair test. So this is a special chair where the person is made comfortable and fixed with lot of belts and straps to ensure that there is no injury. So here the subject is made to sit on a chair with a head tilt of 30 degrees and the chair is rotated at the rate of 30 revolutions per minute for 20 minutes. So that's why you have to secure the person with these belts on the chair. So this is how we ensure that the person is ready. And then what is the principle? So during rotation, what happens is the semicircular canals are set into stimulation. The endolymph, they undergo the rotation and the hair cells gets stimulated. So during this test, the effects of acceleration and deceleration can induce nystagmus, vomiting, and pass pointing or tendency to fall. So all these things are to be observed. These Brenny's chair test is specially used in case of pilots where they have to undergo a lot of effects of acceleration as well as deceleration. Now coming to spinal accessory nerve. That is the 11th cranial nerve. So this green one is the spinal accessory nerve. So it supplies two muscles. Okay, so first one is the trapezius, this one, and the second muscle is sternocleidomastoid. So to assess the 11th cranial nerve, we have to assess these two muscles. Coming to trapezius. So here we ask the subject to shrug his shoulders. So for that, we have to stand behind the subject and should press his shoulder with possible resistance. And then you should ask the subject to shrug his shoulders and simultaneously we apply resistance. So this is how you assess for trapezius muscle. That is coming to next, sternocleidomastoid. Now, what we do here is, for example, you want to assess this sternocleidomastoid, that is the right side. So how will you do it? You ask the subject to move his chin towards the left side and then you oppose the movement towards the left side. So when you oppose the movement of neck towards the left side, you will make the right sternocleidomastoid prominent. So remember, we have turned to the left side to assess the right sternocleidomastoid, that is the opposite. And if you want to examine both the sternocleidomastoid together, then what do? You place your hand on subject's forehead and then you ask the subject to depress her chin against the resistance of your hand like this. So you are trying to touch your chin towards the sternal angle, and the examiner would be applying resistance on your forehead. So when you do this, you are checking for both the sternocleidomastoid simultaneously. Now coming to the lesion. So if there is a lesion of this 11th cranial nerve, what is going to happen? Means our two muscles would get affected. That is trapezius and sternocleidomastoid. So when trapezius is affected, there will be inability to raise the shoulder. Means the drooping of the shoulders would be seen. And when the upper part of the trapezius is affected, the winging of scapula may also be present in the patient. If the sternocleidomastoid is affected, it will affect the rotation of head to the opposite side. So when there is weakness of sternocleidomastoid, the subject will have difficulty in turning the head in the opposite direction. Coming to next nerve, that is the hypoglossal nerve or the 12th cranial nerve. The hypoglossal nerve over here, if you look in this figure, it extensively supplies the intrinsic and the extrinsic muscles of the tongue. So except palatoglossus, which is supplied by vagus, and it also supplies another important muscle, that is genohyoid. Now the corticobulbar fibers, they innervate the contralateral nucleus of the hypoglossal nerve. So if there is damage to, for example, to the left side of corticobulbar fibers, there will be paralysis of muscles of tongue of the right side. So the opposite side gets affected whenever there is damage to the corticobulbar fibers. So to assess the hypoglossal nerve, the target organ is tongue. So in tongue, we observe for the position of the tongue, the strength, the bulk of the tongue, and the strength of the tongue. So 3 points are to be observed. At the same time, you have to pay attention if the tongue is appearing weak, whether there is any atrophy, or if there is any abnormal movements present in the tongue. So these all points would be a part of inspection. So how do we start with? You first ask the subject to open his mouth and observe the position of the tongue and appearance at rest. He is not protruding, he is just opening his mouth, and you observe for the tongue. Here you should observe whether there is any atrophy, tremors, or fasciculations. So in this image, it appears normal. I mean, both sides, the bulk of the muscles also appear normal. Now, to assess for the movements of tongue, we ask the subject to protrude his tongue out, move it in and out, side to side, and up and down. So this is protrusion of tongue completely outside. This is movement of tongue up and down, and this is movement of tongue side to side. So these all actions he is supposed to do. Now there is a special case known as tongue tie or ankyloglossia, means there is an abnormal short tight band of tissue which will attach the tip of the tongue to the floor of the mouth. So if this tongue tie is present, the movement of tongue might get restricted. So if you observe here, this is a normal lingual frenulum, and if you see here, this is the tongue tie. So if the person is not able to protrude his tongue, please rule out tongue tie if it is present or not. Now coming to strength of the muscle. Here, the person is asked to move his tongue within the cheek, side to side, and push his cheeks out. And what you do is you resist the movement of the tongue by pressing it from outside of the cheek. For example, look in this figure. He is moving his tongue to the side of the cheek. And what you do is you will try to press this portion of the tongue from outside. So this is how you assess the strength of the muscle. Now what will happen when there is hypoglossal nerve lesions? Now these lesions are of 3 types. Either it could be nuclear lesion, infranuclear, or that is below the nucleus, or supranuclear, which is above the nucleus. Now supranuclear means it is upper motor neuron type of lesion, whereas infranuclear and nuclear comprises lower motor neuron type of lesion. Now when there is infranuclear or nuclear lesion, now this is a case of unilateral paralysis. So this is right side and this is left side. So if you look at this picture, if you see here, the bulk of the muscle is reduced. Look at the position of the tongue. The tip of the tongue is towards the affected side. Means the tongue is pushed to the paralyzed side. The tongue appears weak on the left side. Look at the bulk. On the left side, it is less. Means there is ipsilateral atrophy. That portion of the tongue would be flaccid, and fasciculations may also be present. So look at this image. You see here, there are abnormal movements of the tongue here. So this is what is fasciculation. So fasciculations and flaccidity usually are seen in lower motor neuron type of lesion, which is also associated with atrophy. So atrophy, flaccidity, fasciculations, they all are features of lower motor neuron type of lesion. This picture is of bilateral paralysis of tongue. So if you observe here, both sides have undergone atrophy. There is marked wasting of the tongue, which is evident by this grooves. There would be fasciculation. Protrusion of tongue would be difficult because of weakness. And the most important is dysarthria and difficulty in pronouncing T and D. So these two letters the person may have difficulty in pronouncing. So these features are present in case of bilateral paralysis of hypoglossal nerve. Now coming to supranuclear lesions. In case of supranuclear lesion, the lesion is either at the level of cerebral cortex or at the level of corticobulbar tracts, at internal capsule or pons. So all these constitute upper motor neuron type of lesion. So in case of unilateral paralysis, the tongue would be pushed to opposite side. In case of infranuclear, the tongue is pushed to the paralyzed side, whereas in supranuclear lesion, the tongue is pushed to the healthy side. Atrophy is usually absent. And if you look at the movements of the tongue, they would be slow, but spasticity would be present. So spasticity is a feature of upper motor neuron type of lesion. Whereas in case of bilateral paralysis, there would be spasticity, dysarthria, and dysphagia. So this is how you should remember the lesions, that is supranuclear and infranuclear type of lesions. So to summarize, these are the tests for hearing, which you are supposed to do on the patient. So this is how you draw the table, that is Rennie's test for right ear, left ear, and then a column for interpretation. So in Rennie's test, so for example, you have examined the person. So you have seen that air conduction is more than bone conduction in the right ear. Again, in the left ear, it is the same finding that AC is more than BC. So what is the interpretation? That it is Rennie's positive. Coming to Weber's test. In both right and left ear, the sound is equally perceived. So interpretation is normal hearing. And when you do Strobeck's test, bone conduction of the subject is equal to that of examiner in both right and left ear. So again, it is normal hearing. So after doing these three tests, what is the interpretation? That there is normal hearing present in both ears. Coming to spinal accessory nerve, we have to assess two muscles, that is trapezius and sternocleidomastoid, right side and left side. And you have to give the grades of power, that is whether it is grade 0, 1, 2, 3, 4 or 5. Coming to hypoglossal nerve, we have to first look for any dysarthria, whether it is present or absent. Then when you ask the person to open the mouth, look at the position of the tongue and appearance at rest. So at that point, is the position central or is any deviation present? So that you have to note. And coming to bulk, whether it is normal or any atrophy is seen. Then next is tone of the tongue, whether it is normal or it appears flaccid or it appears spastic. Then coming to tongue movements, whether they are present or absent. And if they are present, whether they are present to normal extent or not. Is the movement possible in all directions? That you have to check. It is protrusion out, then movement of tongue up and down, and movement of tongue side to side. Then you have to assess the strength of the muscle, whether it is normal or reduced. And then fasciculations, whether they are present or absent. So again, I say that a good physician treats the disease and a great physician treats the patient who has a disease. So you have to examine the patient as a whole and try to summarize all the findings to come to a particular diagnosis. Thank you very much for your patient listening.